My own father sat in the best corner of my restaurant and calmly threatened to destroy everything I had built unless I handed 15% of my business to my brother. He did not call ahead or make a reservation before invading my space on a busy Tuesday evening. He simply poured himself a glass of my expensive wine and waited for me to break down under his gaze. This sudden ambush caught me completely off guard. My kitchen manager Sarah found me back by the prep stations right before the evening dinner rush began. She looked incredibly pale as she held her order clipboard tightly against her chest like a protective shield. She whispered that a family was occupying table 7 and claiming they did not need a reservation because I would understand. I knew instantly that my past had finally caught up with me. I untied my apron and stepped out into the beautifully lit dining room that I spent years designing from scratch. The soft music was playing and the scent of roasted herbs filled the warm air as wealthy customers began to arrive. Seeing Harrison sitting there beside my mother Eleanor made my chest tighten with a familiar dread. My lazy brother Brody sat across from them looking smug. I approached their table but refused to sit down because I needed to maintain some sense of control over the situation. Harrison smiled falsely and remarked that I cleaned up quite nicely for a successful business owner. I told them directly that they needed to leave because my dining room would be packed within 20 minutes. Eleanor did not even look up from her smartphone screen. Harrison slid a thick folded legal document across the white tablecloth and demanded that I sign it before the night ended. He explained that Brody made severe financial mistakes in a Dallas real estate deal and desperately needed a silent partnership stake for collateral. When I hesitated, my father threatened to contact my landlord Arthur Vance to ruin my commercial lease. He knew how to hurt me. They had absolutely no idea that I remembered the secret debt Harrison took out using my identity when I was only 19 years old. It was a $32,000 loan to fund another failed venture for Brody, which destroyed my credit for years. I spent my early 20s working double shifts to pay off that fraud entirely on my own. They thought I was completely defenseless. I told them I needed until 10 p.m. to finish the dinner service before making any final decisions. I walked into the back office and immediately messaged my trusted legal mentor Clara, who knew my family history very well. Clara arrived 45 minutes later with her laptop ready to protect the girl she had mentored since my early days as a line cook. We quickly devised a plan. Clara confirmed that our landlord Arthur Vance was actually a close personal friend of hers, so the threat was completely empty. She spent the next hour drafting an intense 11-page agreement that appeared to grant a partnership but actually framed everything as a personal loan. This contract would legally secure the debt of Brody against his own personal home equity rather than touching my restaurant. We were ready. I returned to the dining room with a fresh bottle of wine and a complimentary cheese plate to make them feel victorious. Hospitality is just a form of theater, and I needed them to believe that their stubborn daughter was finally softening under pressure. Eleanor smiled with quiet satisfaction while Brody poured himself a third glass of wine. They believed they had won the battle. I sat down and informed them that my business accountant required a recorded verbal statement to properly categorize this major financial transaction. I placed my smartphone directly in the middle of the table and pressed the record button carefully. Harrison was so blinded by his own greed that he did not see the massive legal trap opening up right in front of him. He started speaking clearly. Harrison stated his full legal name into the microphone and officially authorized the transaction to satisfy the massive personal debts of his son. I casually steered the conversation toward our family history and asked him to mention the previous $32,000 loan from my youth. He admitted on the recording that they used my identity years ago because he believed it made the old matter vanish. I handed them the heavy stack of legal documents and pointed toward the highlighted signature lines with a calm hand. Brody hesitated for a brief second when he noticed a clause regarding asset guarantees, but I assured him it was just a standard formality. He signed his name quickly and my parents eagerly added their signatures as legal guarantors. They handed the papers back to me. My smartphone buzzed on the table with a text message from Clara confirming that the asset search was fully complete. She discovered that Brody owned a valuable property in Pflugerville with plenty of positive equity to cover his debts. I quietly picked up my phone and stopped the voice recording before looking directly into the eyes of my parents. The dynamic in the room shifted. I told them that I did not send any money to the angry investors of Brody because I actually bought his entire debt note this morning. I paid those investors 60 cents on the dollar to take over the total obligation myself because they wanted out of the risk. I was now officially the primary creditor of my brother and he owed that massive sum directly to my restaurant. Harrison stared at me in absolute silence as the reality of the trap began to sink into his mind. I explained that the contract they just signed allowed me to seize the house of Brody if he defaulted on his payments. Furthermore, I possessed a clear audio recording of my father admitting to grand fraud, which carried serious legal consequences in this state. Eleanor gasped in horror. I stood up from the table and looked at the three people who had abandoned me for 4 long years. They never called when I opened this establishment or when I won prestigious culinary awards 2 years in a row. I built this beautiful life without a single dollar or ounce of support from them. Survival taught me that real family does not steal your future,